guys, welcome back to my channel. Today's video I'm very excited to share with you. We are going through my must-have eyeshadow palettes for the winter time. We've got a couple months of winter left, and I thought a good way to help me see it through to spring is to go through some eyeshadow palettes. It always makes me feel better. So I've got 10 eyeshadow palettes here. A couple of them are new, most of them are some older ones that I love reaching for in the winter time. We're gonna go through them all, do some swatching. Some of these have been a little neglected by me lately, so I'm very excited to give them some use. And there's a good chance if you are an eyeshadow palette lover and collector, you probably have one or two of these. So hopefully that sounds like fun. Before we get into all the palettes, let me remind any of you, especially if you're new here, please subscribe to my channel before you leave and make sure notifications are turned on. With that said, let's get right into it. Okay, so these are in no particular order. We're just gonna kind of go through them. Let's start with one that is very new to me, and it's a smaller palette. This is the Natasha Denona My Mini Dream palette. I love this thing. The more I've used it, the more I've really fallen in love with it. There's a good chance you're probably gonna see it in another video coming up very soon. I have used this so much. I'm not wearing this one on my eyes today, but except for the shade in my crease, it is this shade that this palette is based on, which happens to be Natasha Denona's favorite shade. It's called Nurture, I believe. This is a stunning little neutral palette. I like reaching for cooler berries in the wintertime, cooler bronzes and neutrals, so you'll probably see a theme in some of these palettes, and this one I feel like falls into that neutral category really, really well. You can create something very soft and everyday, or if you want to smoke things out, this dark brown right here is perfect for doing that. You guys know I love Natasha Denona's formula. It is a little on the pricey side. This thing I think is $27 for these 5 tiny little shades, but they are fantastic quality. Let's go to this one next. This is the one that I am wearing on my eyes today. That is so good. If you've been watching me for a while, you'll know how much I love the Nabla Cutie palettes. This is the Nabla Cutie Platinum palette. I hope they still offer this one. I know some of these cutie palettes have been discontinued. The last time I checked, they did still have this one. Take a look at this color story, you guys. It is so pretty. This is one of the prettiest silvers I own. It's very sheer and sparkly, but you can really layer it up and get some serious metallic intensity with it. A lot of microfine glitter in there. This shade is quite sheer as well, but has a beautiful sparkle quality to it. You have some good basic bronzes, one a little warmer, one kind of more rosy in tone, and then a medium brown matte and a very dark cooler tone matte right there. You guys, this is such a good palette. If you like cooler, richer, kind of smoky tones that aren't overly dark, this is fantastic. I love the Nabla finishes. Next to Natasha Denona, Nabla might be my other favorite shimmer formula. At least they're non-traditional shimmers, the ones that have some glitter in them. They look so beautiful on the eyes. You kind of have to see them or try them to believe it. You have to try these palettes to understand how special the formulas are, and I feel that way about Natasha's palettes as well. Next up is the Persona Identity palette. I still have the original packaging. Honestly, I probably should pick up the new one because this one is quite old, but it still works wonderfully well. This is such a good palette, such good quality. The shades are much more dark and smoky and rich than they look in the pan. So I always go into this palette knowing that I've got to use a very, very, very light hand because these are next level pigmented and rich. That said, they blend easy. I love the Persona Shimmer formula. If you like something that's a little bit more, I don't know that I want to say that it's sheer because it's very impactful, but it's much more smoothing than something that's a little bit flaky and maybe dry. So if you have a lot of lines on your lids and you feel like a lot of shimmers maybe emphasize those lines and maybe that bothers you, this is a better shimmer formula that's a little bit more forgiving for a more lined eyelid. So keep that in mind if you haven't tried these. They are fantastic for those of you that are a little bit more sensitive to that. Great neutral palette that leans cool. You have a couple of warm tones in here, but most of this palette leans very neutral and cool toned. Again, it's one that you can keep things nice and light, but you can go a little bit rich and smoky as well. I mean, this palette will give you a richness and depth and intensity probably unlike any other dark mattes in my collection. I mean, these things are seriously rich. So I picked 2 Natasha Denona palettes that I love reaching for in the winter time, especially this time of year. First off is the Retro palette. This is a perfect berry tone palette. If you are into berry tones, this is such a perfectly done berry toned eyeshadow palette that gives you a good variety of cooler berry tones and slightly warmer berry tones, but nothing's overly bold or intense, but they're also not weak and neutral. It's kind of like a more pink and punchy version of the I Need a Nude palette, which I also love, but that one's much more neutral. This one does give you a little bit more color, a little bit more depth, and the shimmers in here, oh, I know I said this about the Nabla shimmers, but I can say it about the Natasha Denona shimmers as well. A lot of sparkle, a lot of dimension, different shimmer finishes that I love working with and layering up because it creates so much variety in the types of looks that you can get. That's one of the reasons I love Natasha Denona so much. I know that her palettes are ridiculously expensive, but if you can afford them, this is a really good one for the winter time. But probably my very favorite Natasha palette for winter is the Glam palette. Sorry, mine's a little squeaky. This is such a good palette, and I don't even like cool tones as much as I feel like many other people do. I generally like warm tones a little bit better, but I wouldn't necessarily call this palette a cool toned palette. It's kind of a neutral palette that leans more on the cool side without things being too ashy or gray. It is beautiful. Again, the shimmers in here, so much variety in both the finishes and the colors. You get the perfect amount of transition shades, dark shades to smoke out your outer corner to use as a liner. Great one for every day or if you want to create something a little bit more glamorous or more intense or rich. Still one of her best palettes, and especially in the wintertime, I love a good sparkly eyelid. I mean, always. Saying I only like that in the wintertime is kind of ridiculous. You guys know how much I love sparkle on my lid, but especially something a little bit more blue or silvery. It has that kind of cooler dimension. It looks so pretty in the wintertime in particular, and this is just such a perfect palette. Really for any time of year, but especially in the winter. But fear not, if the Natasha Denona palettes are just way outside of your budget, I completely understand. I have two drugstore recommendations that actually mimic those two palettes. First off, the Making Mauves palette from ColourPop. Now, obviously this one only has 9 shades rather than the 15 that you get in the Natasha Denona, but this palette has a similar vibe to the retro palette. You get the slightly cooler tone berries, some really beautiful shimmers in here, but a couple that are a little bit on the warmer side. It's kind of, if you were to take that palette and condense it, this is what you would get, and at a fraction of the price. Great formula. None of these are duds. They all work really well, both the mattes and the shimmers. And the shimmers, you do get some variety in the types of shimmers that you get in the finishes of them. I think this one is a Super Shock, and these two are just traditional metallics. It's stunning. If you like your berry tones that lean a little bit purpley, this one is so lovely and creates the most beautiful eye looks. And then one to mimic the Natasha Denona Glam palette is the That's Taupe palette. I've talked about this palette several times before, compared it to the Glam. It's such a good alternative to that one, again in a more condensed form. You obviously don't get quite the variety in here, but you get a very similar feel in the finished looks that you can create. Beautiful formulas. Once again, the mattes are great, the shimmers are beautiful. You get a Super Shock and then a couple more traditional metallics. You get some cool tone transitions, one that's a little bit more warm. It's absolutely beautiful, and again, very affordable. Okay, I've got just 3 more. Next up is one from Sydney Grace. You guys know, or if you don't, if you're brand new here, Sydney Grace is my very favorite eyeshadow brand out there. They are an indie brand. If you are not way deep into eyeshadows, you may not even know who they are. But if you've watched any of my videos, you definitely know who they are. And this is the palette that I love for the wintertime. This is the Love's Journey palette. It is absolutely stunning. Now, this is a very cool tone palette. It actually kind of reminds me a little bit of the Glam palette. Now, you get some different shades in here though, and they actually look different on the eyes than they do in the pan. Like a shade like this that looks like it would just maybe not show up on me has a ton of color in it, a lot more than you would think looking at it in the pan. They're just packed with pigment. That said, they're very easy to blend, very easy to work with, and you guys know the Sydney Grace shimmer formula is liquefied, beautiful liquefied metal. It is so pretty on the eyes. And if you use a brush, you can be a little bit more subtle with it if you like something that's not so in your face. But if you do like something very metallic and sparkly, they're absolutely stunning. I mean, look at these swatches again. They are so beautiful. I always am reminded when I'm swatching Sydney Grace eyeshadow palettes, I love swatching them because they're just so impressive in a swatch, but they're also impressive on the eyes. You cannot beat the Sydney Grace formula. It is absolutely glorious. Next up is another Nabla palette. This is a side-by-side palette. This is a really nice palette. It actually took me a while for this to grow on me. When I first tried it out, I wasn't sure that I liked it, but the more I've used it, the more I've realized how much variety you get in this more neutral leaning palette. This is one that I would say is mostly neutral, that leans a little bit warm. You probably have a few more warm tones in here than you do cool tones, but nothing's overly warm, and you get plenty in here that are kind of more cool tone, you get this cool tone gray and a black. You have a cool tone brown here and a darker one here. Then some absolutely gorgeous shimmers. Again, Nabla has some incredible shimmer formulas and such a beautiful sparkle to some of their shimmer formulas that look so flattering on the eyes. If you are someone that hears shimmer or glitter and just thinks maybe that's not for me, or you're very sensitive to anything that's too chunky or glittery, the glitter particles in here are so micro fine that they sparkle in a way that's very natural looking, or more natural looking, I should say. It's just absolutely flattering and beautiful. They're easy to work with. You get good variety in here. Just such a great palette, and one that I forgot how much I love this one. I'm excited to use it again. All right, last but not least is one from Juvia's Place, and it is the Coffee Shop palette. This is such an impressive palette. It was one of my favorite palettes from 2023. It's so good. I'll always have a special place in my heart for Juvia's Place because they're one of the first eyeshadow brands that I really fell in love with. I love so many of their palettes, and this one's very interesting and unique because it's a bronze palette that gives you a ton of variety in that lane, in the lane of bronzes. You get some cool tones in here, some mustard tones, some warmer tones, some shimmers that are more gold, some are copper, some are silvery. There's just such a variety in the types of neutral or bronze eye looks you can create with this palette. It's absolutely stunning. The formulas are all amazing. Some of these shimmer formulas are not their traditional shimmers. A couple of them are a little bit more sheer and kind of glitter toppers, which I really like to see. I like to see Juvia's Place experimenting with some different shimmer formulas because I feel like it gives a little bit of variety. Now, I wouldn't necessarily say that they've done as good a job as Nabla and Natasha Denona with some of their different types of shimmers, but I think they're really fun to play with. They all perform pretty well, and I love the looks that come out of this. And that is it, you guys. Those are my must-have eyeshadow palettes for the wintertime. What did you guys think? Is there anything that was missing that you think I should have mentioned? What is your number one wintertime eyeshadow palette? I would love to hear. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you guys are all doing well. Let me give you one final reminder. Please consider subscribing before you leave, and I will see you in my next video. Bye. Mess. I've actually thought about going, oh, whoops. Bus is here.